Millionaire. The word did not exist until this moment in history. It was invented for ordinary people, servants, shopkeepers, tradesmen, who became unimaginably rich in a matter of months, all by buying shares in a single company. A company that promised the riches of an entire continent. For a brief, dizzying moment, a narrow street in Paris was the center of the financial world. It was so packed, you could not move through it. Dukes stood shoulder to shoulder with servants. Aristocrats rented out their attic windows for fortunes just so the rich could lean out and scream orders to buy. A hunchback is said to have made a small fortune simply by renting out his back as a writing desk for trades. In months, the shares rose 20 times over. And then it all collapsed. The fortunes vanished. The paper they were printed on became worthless. A nation that had felt rich beyond measure woke up ruined. And the man behind all of it, for a brief moment the most powerful person in France, fled the country in disgrace. This is the story of John Law, the gambler who reinvented money, built the greatest fortune machine the world had ever seen, and watched it destroy a kingdom. Begin with the man. John Law was not French. He was a Scot, born in Edinburgh, the son of a goldsmith and banker. He was brilliant with numbers, charming, tall, and fond of two things above all: gambling and women. As a young man, he moved to London, lived lavishly, and one day he killed a man in a duel over a woman. He was sentenced to death. Law escaped from prison and fled to the continent. And for the next 20 years, this fugitive wandered the cities of Europe, Amsterdam, Venice, Genoa, making his living as a professional gambler. But he was not gambling on luck. Law studied probability. He understood odds better than almost anyone alive. At the gaming tables of Europe, he grew rich, and he watched how money moved. And in those years, Law developed an idea that was, for its time, revolutionary. Here is the idea. In Law's day, money meant gold and silver, coins. And there was a problem with coins. There were never enough of them. A nation's wealth was limited by how much metal it could dig out of the ground. If trade grew faster than the supply of gold, the economy choked. Law's insight was this: money does not need to be gold. Money is just a tool to move value around. What if a country printed paper money instead? Notes backed not by metal, but by the wealth of the nation itself, its land, its trade, its future. With paper, a government could create exactly as much money as the economy needed. Trade would flourish. Everyone would grow richer. It was, in many ways, a brilliant idea. In fact, it is close to how money works today. But it was an idea waiting for a desperate country to try it. France was that country. When the old king died, he left France nearly bankrupt. Decades of war and royal extravagance had buried the kingdom under a mountain of debt. The new ruler, the Duke of Orleans, was desperate for a solution. And then John Law arrived in Paris with one. Law convinced the Duke to let him open a bank, a private bank that would issue paper money. Its notes were backed by gold, and they worked beautifully. They were convenient. They were trusted. Trade picked up. For the first time, France saw what paper money could do, and it liked what it saw. But the bank was only half of Law's plan. The other half was a company. Law had been granted control of France's territory in North America, a vast, almost empty wilderness along the Mississippi River, claimed by France and called Louisiana. It was enormous, covering much of the center of what is now the United States. Law founded a company to develop it, the Mississippi Company, and he was given a monopoly on all trade with the colony. Now watch what he did, because this is the heart of the story. Law told the people of France that Louisiana was a land of unimaginable riches. Gold, silver, fertile land waiting to be claimed. It was mostly a fantasy. The colony was swamp and forest, and the settlers, sent there, often died. But the story was intoxicating. And Law sold shares in the company to the public so that ordinary people could own a piece of this promised fortune. Then he connected the two machines. His bank printed paper money. The public used that money to buy shares in his company. As demand for shares grew, their price rose. And as the price rose, more people wanted in. So Law printed more money to let them buy. The bank fed the company. The company fed the bank. Around and around, faster and faster. The shares began to climb. 500, 1,000, then 5,000. The narrow street became a frenzy. People sold everything they owned to buy in. Servants became rich. The word millionaire was born to describe the new fortunes. At its peak, the company was theoretically worth more than all the gold and silver in France, many times over. For a moment, John Law was the most powerful man in the kingdom. He was made Controller General of Finances, the head of the entire French economy. A Scottish fugitive, once sentenced to hang, now ran the finances of the greatest power in Europe. But the machine had a fatal flaw. It was built on a story, and the story was not true. The riches of Louisiana did not exist. The company was never going to earn the profits its share price promised. The whole towering structure rested on confidence, on people believing the shares would keep rising. And confidence is a fragile thing. A few large investors grew nervous. They began to cash out, to sell their shares and demand real gold for their paper money. And once a few began, others followed. People rushed to the bank to trade their notes for metal. But Law had printed far more paper than there was gold to back it. There was not nearly enough. Law tried everything to stop the collapse. He limited how much gold people could withdraw. He made it illegal to hold large amounts of gold and silver. He devalued the shares by decree, then reversed himself. Each desperate move only deepened the panic. The price of shares fell as fast as it had risen. The paper money became worthless. Fortunes made on paper turned back into nothing. By the end, the system was in ruins. The Mississippi Company collapsed. The bank failed. Thousands were wiped out, and the French economy was shattered. John Law, who months earlier had been the most powerful man in France, was now the most hated. He fled the country just as he had fled England decades before, a fugitive once again. He left behind almost everything he owned. He spent his final years drifting through Europe, gambling once more to survive, and he died in Venice, poor, in the city where he had once made his living at the tables. The damage outlived him. The collapse left France so scarred that the country grew deeply suspicious of paper money and banks for generations. Some historians argue this fear held back French finance for the better part of a century and helped set the stage for the financial chaos that came with the revolution decades later. And here is the strangest part. John Law was not entirely wrong. Paper money, backed by the strength of a nation rather than by metal, is exactly what the world uses today. His core idea was sound. What destroyed him was not the idea, but the greed it unleashed, the printing without limit, the fortune built on a story, the confidence stretched until it snapped. He set out to free a nation from the tyranny of gold. Instead, he gave the world one of its first great lessons in the danger of paper. A reminder that money, in the end, is only worth what people believe it is worth. And that belief can vanish in a single afternoon.